Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Eric Murphy.
I'm V Bianca.
This is Skeptic Generation,
and
we need to talk. Hey V, how's it going?
Hi, it's going good. How are you?
I am doing well. Oh my goodness. This has been one heck of a week. Before we dive into calls, for those who don't live in Texas, which is most people watching, Texas does not have the infrastructure to deal with snow, even when it's a tiny bit of snow.
No.
And so V and I spent most of the week locked in. And we didn't kill each other. Things were good, but it was pretty intense. So we're kind of happy to see things coming back to normal. There's still snow on the ground, but it is okay to drive. So that's good.
Yes.
V, how's your week been?
My week has been busy. I started going back into the office for work because I don't do this full time, and it was good to actually be around people, to like see other individuals. Because as my partner, you don't count as people.
Yeah, I noticed.
But yeah, it's been good. You actually did something with Holy Koolaid this week as well.
I did. Holy Koolaid recently did his first live in-person debate against Inspiring Philosophy. And when he got the debate, he reached out to me and he was like, Eric, could you help me out? And so for a week ahead of time, I just kind of sat with him and we went over what IP has done in the past, what other debates have gone over the topic, and kind of strategized and worked it out. And,
Who is IP?
Inspiring Philosophy, or Michael Jones, I think is his name?
Michael Jones.
Michael Jones, there we go. Anyway, he did the debate and then we sat down and did a review. So just about 2 hours ago, Holy Koolaid released a debate review with he and I where we sat down right in this studio and talked about it. So if you want to see me and Thomas Westbrook of Holy Koolaid go over that debate, the link is in the description box for this video. Not only that, that we have more news. February 23rd is going to be a big day for us because it is it's yours.
Yeah, the next Versus episode is going to be coming out on the 23rd. So keep an eye out for that as well. The link will be up there shortly. We're going to have a fun conversation, you guys. I'm very excited about it.
The topic came up and you and I both launched into it furiously for about 5 minutes and then we went, oh, no, hold on. We got to hold off until we
yeah. We were like, what should we talk about next? We could talk about this or that or this. And then we found this topic and we started arguing immediately. And we were like, oh, I guess we found it.
Yeah,
I guess this is the one.
So it's going to be good.
Okay. Before we start, though, I have a bone to pick.
Yeah, you do. Holy
fish
crap.
Bone in my gills.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. So forgive me for going off script here. Normally we'll jump right into calls. I promise you guys on the line and you guys calling in, we are going to get to you in just a few minutes. And if you want to call in while we're on this little bit of a tangent, you can do that at 585-526-8774 or tiny.cc/callSG. You may have noticed that the name of this episode is called Jesus Commands the Fish.
Yeah.
If you are curious about why that is, I want to take you on a little journey. So
I heard all about this.
Oh, multiple times. A couple of days ago, we saw a tweet, we being I, called by Mike Chalmers. Shout out, Mike. Don't know who you are. Sorry, your mug is on our screen right now. And it says this: we are merely fishers of men. Let's remember the simplicity of our task. We cast the nets. Jesus commands the fish. And I lost it. I lost it. Why is that so bad? Why is that so, like, it's so bad. Jesus commands the fish.
It evokes so many images of just like Jesus trying to scare the fish upriver so that, yeah.
It's like, fucking Aquaman.
Okay, the fact we took time to create a couple of images.
We did. We cared about this so much that we straight up made a segment out of it. And here's the deal. The more I look at it, the more I realize why this is such a bad concept. And I have multiple degrees in this, in written communication.
You do.
So I kind of wanted to break this down for y'all, because this isn't the only time this kind of like really tepid, stupid analogy kind of comes up in Christian circles. It's a lot of that like Christianese, like flowery language kind of deal. And if you can break down exactly why it doesn't work, they don't usually have responses to that. And it can help you actually better defend yourself from being drawn into this kind of thing. So I want to go over exactly why Jesus commands the fish is so bad. Okay, just a couple of things. Indulge me.
I know, no.
This is gonna be fun. All right, so first, here we go. The usefulness of using an analogy when you're trying to communicate with someone hinges on it being more relatable than the thing you're trying to communicate, right? So, for example, if I were to say, I feel a certain way when it rains, you're not going to know exactly how I feel when it rains, right? Like that's not something that you would have any knowledge of. So if I wanted to communicate that to you, then what I would say is, rain makes me feel cozy, like when I'm wrapped in a blanket in bed drinking hot chocolate, right? And you can take all of those experiences that are shared most likely and come up with an emotion, and then put that emotion on what I'm trying to say, and then you understand where I'm coming from, right? So that's the use of an analogy. What you can't do is use what you're trying to analogize in the analogy, because structurally it doesn't work. It's essentially begging the question from a literary standpoint. So what you don't want to do is say, rain makes me feel cozy, like being wrapped up in a blanket listening to the rain. Like, no, that's not going to help anybody. Don't reference the thing you're analogizing in the analogy. Don't talk about Jesus in your analogy about fishing, because what you're trying to communicate is about Jesus and not fishing. So structurally, very, very bad. Okay, that's one. Second, good analogies generally accurately represent reality, because if they don't, then they're useless. So imagine you were worried about doing something.
Okay.
Right? You were concerned.
This is every day.
And I said, Eric, don't worry. It's just like riding a bike. You just put your hands on the pedals and go. That would not be helpful to you.
I would have so many more questions.
Exactly. That's not helping you communicate if you're not using things technically accurately. In this case, everybody, Jesus doesn't command fish to jump into one's fishing nets. That is not how fishing works. Not even in the Gospels, during the story about the fishermen getting more fish than they expected, was that how that worked. So that is just plain wrong. And it throws a concern for me on whether or not this dude knows what fishing is. And if he doesn't, why is he talking about fishing to me?
Well, I have to imagine at some point he was very young and went fishing with an adult, and they didn't catch anything, and it was like, well, God wills it, God just didn't have us catching fish in his plan, maybe.
Well, I mean, if Jesus were Aquaman,
yes,
then Jesus could.
I had so much fun
potentially
making these images. Command
the fish, but this is not how things work.
I'm so sorry.
All right, and then finally, if you are going to be in technical error and structurally unsound in your analogy, at least get the actual point across. And Mike doesn't do this either, because here's the problem. The thing that Jesus was trying to convey to his fisherman disciples was that this is going to be your way of life now. This is going to be hard. You're going to get up before dawn every day, and you're going to have to go out and do this as your job. And if you are not successful, if you don't catch fish, you're fucked. Like that's your income. That's your livelihood. You're not going to be able to just say, "Oh well, like I guess I'll do something else now."
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Yes, but and also our mods are incredible. They already whip something together. And if you type in !fish in the live chat, it pops up.
Jesus has now commanded 9 fish because Jesus commands the fish. Oh, that's amazing. These
how many
mods
fishes
are
can we command this episode?
Let's
That's
see
fantastic.
how many fish we can command. No, but the point here is that he not only is structurally unsound in this analogy, he not only is technically inaccurate in this analogy, but he also has so completely misunderstood the original point of the analogy that he did a 180, and instead of saying, hey, this is your job now, go do this thing well or else, it's, oh well, it's just fishing, guys. It's merely casting nets.
Yeah.
So, in short, this was bad. This was a bad tweet. Mike, if you're watching, call the show and defend this tweet, or maybe just don't tweet.
Well, so okay.
Jesus commands the fish.
That was really good. Okay. So I'd be interested in what people think about this. Let us know in the comments if you want us to tear down stupid tweets at the beginning of each episode, because that would be fun.
Or just go off on random rants beforehand.
Yeah.
Just to give a little bit more of the oomph.
Or if you see a really stupid tweet that you'd love us to talk about, shoot us an email at
because I don't have nearly enough of those in my life.
Contact skepticgeneration@gmail.com.
No, do not email
Send
us a
tweets?
tweet.
Stupid tweet?
No, do not email us
Screen
a
cap
tweet.
it?
Just retweet it with our at Skeptic Show.
Oh, that's a better way of doing it. I'm old.
This is, oh my goodness.
Shut up.
That was
We're done.
embarrassing
We're
for
done.
you.
We're moving on. I am just going to keep going. Let's dive into calls, shall we?
Let us dive in.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Who are we talking to first?
So we have some theist callers who've called in, and a few of them dropped, and I'm really bummed. If you are a religious caller, you wanted to call in, now's the time. I'm bummed that a couple of them dropped. But first, I want to talk to Chaos, because I love talking to Chaos. Chaos in the UK, it looks like you wanted to talk about, let's see, dismissal of the kalam usually changes into rejection later in the discussion, and that distinction matters. Is that about what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that's more of like an example of a broader point that I'm wondering if you guys agree with, but that was like the point of discussion. So the more broad point is that sometimes things that get dismissed in a philosophical conversation, the nuance of them still matters because they get referenced again later.
Sure, but also that's kind of my understanding of how you apply skepticism, right? What if I'm wrong? What would being wrong look like? And then how can I determine if, that's the case? And so let's say, I needed to figure out whether or not I have enough medication for the week, right? There's a statement that I can make. I have enough medication for the week, and what I can do is test that and go, okay, well, if I didn't, then I could go check, and there would be not enough. What if I forgot? Like, those are the questions I would need to ask myself to falsify the statement and then test it. So I think rejection, or finding possible rejections for a claim, kind of are necessary in evaluating that claim, aren't they?
Yeah, my general issue with it is because I don't like the kalam's an argument. It's a dumb argument.
Agreed.
But when, quite often when I hear people, usually atheists, rejecting the kalam, they will say, well, we can't prove it, so it's of no value to the argument. But I might then later hear the same person say, because we've shown this is false earlier.
True enough, which is why they should call the show. Because I think I can speak for V and I both, at least I speak for myself. I reject the kalam outright. I don't just dismiss it, I reject it. And I will push back on that all day long. But I understand that kind of frustration.
Yeah, it's important to realize that when you're talking to somebody in the context of a debate, you are using the words you want to be using. For example, don't say Jesus commands the fish when what you want to say is, I don't want to feel responsibility for you, so I'm washing my hands of it.
Or I'm doing a bad job converting people.
For example, I agree with you. If somebody is saying, we can't prove this thing, and then later translating that to, we have proven this thing false, that's an error on their end. That is not accurate. They can say, we have agreed for the content, for the duration of this debate, that we can't use that as evidence anymore. That's fine. But not being able to use something as evidence, putting it on a shelf, is not automatically making it wrong or saying that it is in error. It's just saying this is not useful to the conversation. So why are you bringing it back up, right? So yeah, you definitely need to be consistent in that if you're going to be having these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you guys both agree with me because I'm more confident in it then. Usually you have sensible takes. But like I see a lot of this. This just felt like the obvious example. But it feels really weird to have to go back and be like, to the person who usually sometimes even has Skeptic in their username, let's reel it back a minute and go and check our working.
Yeah.
Reel it back. I see what you did there.
Oh, you have no idea how many fish puns I'm trying to ignore in the live chat. Somebody said cod is dead, and I'm just I'm just trying not to die. So interesting. So you reject the kalam, right?
Yeah, I would disagree with you in saying that it's actively false, but I would say we cannot know it's true.
Really?
Yeah.
So are you going classic kalam or wait, no, that's kalam. Sorry, I was going to say, are you going classic cosmological? Like, obviously you're not. Could you please call in? Because could you please call in again with that topic? Because I would love to talk about that.
Well, I mean, they've only been on for 4 minutes. If you wanted to get into it, that would be really
Chaos,
interesting.
would you like to get into it?
Ooh, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
Okay. So,
Eric's excited.
I know, right? Okay, so what I want to talk about isn't the cosmological argument, because the cosmological argument is boring. It's been had for hundreds of years. The Kalam cosmological argument is an addendum. It takes the cosmological argument and then it has more to state. So what do you know of the Kalam, and could you possibly present it so that we can discuss it in a way that the audience can follow with us?
Sure. So it's just occurred to me that there's a second half that some people sometimes also call the Kalam that I would actively reject.
Okay.
So I guess it depends how we're defining terms here.
I'm going with William Lane Craig's formation of it.
So the first bit is usually everything that begins to exist had a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Right. That's the cosmology.
Yeah. And then usually there is some sort of statement about this entity then therefore needing to be spaceless, timeless, and so on. But I would reject some of the properties like omnipotence, person.
Sure. Okay. So, and I'm sure you would replace it with something like maximally great.
Chaos, I think you must have pressed mute on your end or dropped out.
Because we can't hear you.
Hey,
there you are.
Is this better?
Yes.
Yes.
You're back.
Sorry, my phone screen turned off, so it shut off my mic.
Bummer.
Where did you hear up to?
So you gave us the cosmological argument, and then you said you disagree with the omnis, and I responded asking, so you probably go with maximal?
Rather than maximal, I just go with sufficient because...
Ooh, even better. Okay, cool. What else?
Like, I reject the idea of a creator being personal, being necessary. That just... I've never seen a reasonable justification for that.
Agreed. I think sufficient is a whole lot easier to swallow. But is that the part of the cosmological argument you want to talk about, or is there more? Because I know there's more from what I've heard about it and from what I've gotten.
I feel like I'm blanking on a bit that I'm missing. Could you fill that in for me?
Well, I think that's because the cosmological argument and the kalam can be used interchangeably, but there are multiple cosmological arguments. So that might be where some of this is stemming from. The cosmological argument in general is the kalam. The kalam was coined, I believe, in the Islamic Golden Age, and has been co-opted essentially by current Christian apologists. William Lane Craig and kind of his ilk are the kinds of people that bring that and then have that whole second part that goes beyond just something caused the universe to something intelligent or something with agency or something with a motive caused the universe. And that's kind of the two parts. So something caused the universe to exist, and then something, and then like kind of defining that something as something that is not natural or is not it is in some way has agency, if that makes sense. So
here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for filling that in. William Lane Craig adds on that if the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists. Without, the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. Therefore, an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who sans the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. So that's kind of what I'm going for when somebody brings up Islam. So do you?
Okay, so I would pick that apart a little bit and accept bits of it. So I accept that it would have to have sufficient power, and I accept that it would have to be spaceless and timeless in terms of our space and time, though meta-space and time could exist, I guess. And I accept the uncaused bit.
Okay. Why?
Yeah, that's my question as well. What about some of those attributes work for you and fall into your worldview in a positive way? And why are you kind of not as convinced by others? Because to me, usually when I interact with somebody who accepts some of that, they kind of go whole hog on it. And I'm curious about the way you're picking those apart.
So I think that the omni traits are just incoherent from the outset.
I would agree with that.
I think that the idea that a god would have to be personal is to say that the universe is human-centric, which is not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
I accept spaceless and timeless because insofar as I usually hear a definition of the universe, if something existed in our current understanding of space and time, that would simply functionally be the universe.
Sure.
And so it must be existent outside of that if we are to accept it. And like I said, meta-space and time could in theory exist. And then I see, you could go one of three ways here. Infinite regress, in terms of, okay, but then that needs a creation, but then that needs a creation. But another two possibilities are simply that it's eternal, which I think the universe can also be eternal, and that functions equally well. But I don't think we can dismiss the idea of an eternal entity. But I also think that another viable option is an entity that can appear or disappear in this meta space and time without requiring causation.
Interesting. I'm sure you understand that I see a couple of leaps in there, and the could would be contingent on some really, really big things, like whether or not something can come from nothing, if that's even if that even makes sense. If something like metatime exists, or if, an entity, there's so much kind of wiggle room in there. I think that if something was sufficient to create a universe, then it's more likely that it doesn't have a mind than if it did, because a mind requires agency.
The mind thing, I forgot to mention that I reject that. I don't think it necessarily has to have a mind.
Okay, what about necessary? Because that's one of the big ones that gets leaned on in the cosmological argument, is that
I don't like people using the whole necessary thing. I think that depending on how the universe functions, I guess it could in theory be necessary.
Well, so
because we don't know.
Well, so the reason that goes in, I want to bring the conversation to ontology, and I need to not do that because that's not what you called in about. So I need to reel it back. Hold on. Is there anything you want to do?
I'm not going to talk about the reeling again. I will not bring it up.
Why would you?
I'm sorry. I can't help it.
Oh, you are such a dad. Okay. Well,
so here's the thing then. Chaos, from what I'm hearing, it feels like you kind of just have thrown out that second part altogether. Is there anything from that second part that you do find useful beyond sufficient?
The spaceless and timeless bits, I think, are important if you want to make the Kalam work.
Okay. I think you're right.
Because,
I think that's accurate as far as my understanding, my very, very limited understanding of cosmology goes. If you want to propose that there was a before space and time, and something lives there, that thing cannot be bound by space or time. The problem for me is from that doesn't feel like what we have seen to be the case in terms of how things have started, right? Like, there is no before space and time. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think the thing to bring back round, in case someone in the audience has kind of lost this bit in all of our discussing the philosophy behind it, is that this is not a setup of the Kalam that or the cosmological argument, if that's more accurate, that I'm actively accepting. It's just one that I don't think I can actively reject.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Chaos has given their reasoning for not wanting to reject it outright. Eric, you say you do reject it outright. Where is it coming in for you? Where are you standing here?
Sure. Where I go with that is the timeless, spaceless piece. I reject the idea that existence can be without time or space. I think that you need a couple of things. If I were to describe something that does not exist in space, I've eliminated an ontological entity entirely. I can talk about a concept, but not an actor, not a physical thing. If I'm talking about without time, also it is you lack the ability to do anything. In my mind, I imagine something without time being like a statue. Having the act of creation would require that, because creation is something that would need time. And so, your idea of meta time, I haven't really heard about that and I haven't really interacted with that. And so I don't know. And that might cause me to change my opinions. It might not. But based on those two, I've got to throw that out just because I feel like you need those things, that they're kind of, I just imagine like 3 tent poles, right? Holding up the tent.
Yeah.
I feel like you can't just have one of those tent poles. I feel like you need all 3.
Yeah, and if I rejected the idea of meta time, I would agree with you. I think that's identified our sticking point there, is the idea of meta time. Now, I think the idea of meta time renders the Kalam functionally useless anyway, other than as a hypothetical explanation.
Okay. Well, I don't know if we're in the weeds or if we're right on point with where we need to be. But
well, I think it's cool that we found exactly where the disconnect is.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to me always when the disconnect is something that we have not rejected yet and something we just don't know about. So what I'm going to want to do is look into what meta time is. I tried to Google it real fast just to see if I could come up with some kind of answer, and all I got was Facebook metaverse stuff, which is annoying. Very, very annoying. But Chaos, if you have links to that, feel free to send them our way and we'll make sure they're in the description just so people can check that out. I would love to continue this conversation, maybe do some digging on meta time and come back and see if it changes one of our opinions on the Kalam, because this is a new direction for a very old argument that I'm excited about.
Yeah, and you're a wonderful interlocutor. It is fun and exciting to talk to you. Thank you, Chaos.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun to chat with you guys as well. By the way, Eric, I do want to finish our conversation. My computer died completely, like my Wi-Fi card went out. So that's why our last one got cut short.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Definitely. Just reach out to me. I'm really hard to get in touch with, aren't I? Are we friends on Facebook or followed on Twitter or something like that? I'm sure we can get in touch.
I know I follow you on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. Shoot me a message on Twitter.
No worries.
All right.
Take care, Chaos.
Thanks, Chaos.
All right. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye. Ooh, we've got... So, V, this person you banned from the show. And so I don't know if you want to take them or if you just want to take somebody else.
Well, here's the thing. A ban is up to interpretation. And I know that you have been wanting to engage.
I have.
So...
But as since we're doing this equally,
I appreciate
we're equally
you
yoked. If you say
checking
this
in.
person's banned, then they're banned.
I am very interested to see if they have made any amount of leeway in their arguments, or if we're going to hear
just the same thing.
the same thing, but one way or another.
I think we'll get an interesting call.
Let's talk to Robin in DC.
Robin, the statement is, neutrality towards God is impossible as God is metaphysically primary. Robin, you're live with Eric and V.
Yeah. Do you guys? Thanks for taking my call. Do you guys agree with that statement?
So I don't understand when you say metaphysically primary. I understand metaphysics. I understand the word primary, but when you put those two together, I'm not yet on board. Could you explain that a bit?
Yeah. God is defined as, in this conception, as that which is ultimate and the mind, and so God would just be that which all things derive and depend upon. And so that's what I take metaphysically primary to mean. All things have their foundation in God.
Why is that different than necessary, or are you just using the words interchangeably?
Well, no, it's different from necessary because necessary doesn't necessarily have to deal with metaphysics.
Well,
like you can say something's necessarily true. I mean, of course, there's a metaphysical reality, but I'm talking about when I say God is metaphysically primary, or he's at that metaphysical context, we're talking about, ultimately speaking, what everything derives and depends upon.
Okay, so when you say ultimate in the mind, can you kind of see where I'm a little confused there? All
I'm using mind to mean is that it's conscious, as awareness. So in eternity past, God would be entirely self-conscious. Okay,
so when you're saying the mind, you're not talking about all people's minds. You're talking about something else. When like in big.
No, our minds also have a property of being conscious.
Okay, I feel like I'm getting more in the mud here, and I'm wondering, am I cutting you off too quickly? I still don't understand, and I really want to try here. When you say something is primary or ultimate in the mind, I think you just responded that just means that God has a mind, but also that it's in all of our minds.
Oh no, I didn't say ultimate in the mind. I don't know if that's what your call screener wrote down. I said ultimate and a mind. It's ultimate and a mind.
No, I misheard you. Actually, the call screener didn't write that down. Ultimate and a mind. Okay, so
yeah.
Oh my gosh, now we have way more room to work with. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so I know that we've talked about the mind a bit before, that I don't think a mind can exist without a body, and I don't know if there's a whole lot more meat on the bone on that, but ultimate kind of does. It makes me curious. Like my understanding.
Well, I just called. Look, I mean, what I called for is just I want to make a case for why you cannot be neutral.
Sure.
That's not really relevant as to what I believe as to whether or not God exists. Like I could believe that I could be an atheist and believe that God does not exist. I could still make the case that I'm presenting here either way. Because all it's talking about is whether or not you can be neutral.
The concern here, though, is we do want to get to your main point and your main question, but you come on the show and you throw a whole bunch of words that seem a little word salady at us and say, do you agree? And we're not going to agree with something unless we know exactly what you mean by it. So that's where we got off track. If you want to get directly to the question, just ask the question in a way we can understand it.
Yeah, it's not understanding what you mean when you talk about things like ultimate. We're just going to talk past each other, and it's not useful.
Well, did I not just define it? Is it not clear to you now what ultimate means?
No.
So ultimate, again, just means that all things derive and depend upon God. So in this case, when I say God is ultimate, I'm saying all things derive and depend upon God, and that God is entirely and non-conditionally he's not contingent upon anything.
Okay. So you're saying that all things depend upon God. So how do we determine that?
That's not. I'm just dealing with the definition. It's not whether or not we determine that God exists. Again, like this. So my point is not to make the argument that God exists to you. That's not what I called for. I can do that, but that's not. I mean, that would just be like a side issue.
Well, so here's the thing: is your definitions imply that a God exists and that a God has to exist.
No.
To use those definitions, because if
a definite like Superman doesn't have to exist in order for to define Superman. Right? Like a definition is entirely different from a claim that something exists. All I'm doing right now is defining a term because you said you didn't understand what it meant.
Right, and baked into that is the idea that a God is non-conditional.
So are you asking us that...
No, nothing's baked into anything. All I'm doing is defining a term. Like,
you're defining
I'm like for nothing else would you be saying this, right? You don't say that for us to watch the movie Marvel that Iron Man exists now because they've defined Iron Man in a certain way with certain properties. All I've done right now is define God, and me defining God as necessary. I could define Iron Man as necessary. That doesn't mean that Iron Man exists. I'm not claiming that Iron Man exists.
If the definition of Iron Man means that he necessarily exists, then yes, saying I agree with the definition of Iron Man suggests we agree that he necessarily exists.
Yeah.
No, because for example, in Islam, okay, many Muslims in the Quran would say that Allah is necessary. That is not. I don't have to believe that Allah exists in order for me to accept the definition of Allah or one of His properties.
So, what you're asking us? Do we accept that you define God in this way?
Yeah, that's all we're talking about is definitions here. When we said that God is ultimate, we're just defining God. That is not asking you to accept that He exists or that He's necessary. It's just a definition that God is the foundation of all things that exist metaphysically. I'm not asking you to accept His existence.
I would accept that you define God that way.
Yeah.
Okay. So now are all the terms defined now? So now when I say that you cannot be neutral towards God, we understand what that means?
We cannot be neutral towards your definition of God.
Yeah. Do you accept that?
Accept what exactly? That we cannot be neutral towards your definition of God?
Yeah.
I think we can be convinced or unconvinced.
Well, that's not an answer to the question. By neutrality, I mean that you neither hold a position that God exists or does not exist. So somebody who claims to be neutral would say, I'm agnostic. I neither affirm nor deny God's existence, as He's just been defined. Do you believe that you can be neutral towards God?
Well, you just used a really great example, an agnostic. I've met plenty of agnostics who say that determining whether or not a God exists is not possible.
Right, it's not dependent on a definition. It's impossible.
Yeah, and so for somebody to say, I think determining whether or not a God exists was, if they said that it was entirely impossible, then I would say that person's taking a neutral position because their statement, what they're saying is that they think it's not, that there is no way to get to an answer to them.
Okay. Well, I would say that the definition is actually relevant because the whole point is that there are certain categories of things that you cannot be neutral towards, as opposed to categories of things that you can be neutral towards.
Ooh,
I'm taking God with this definition in mind.
What are these categories of things
God
you
would
can't be neutral towards?
Well, one of the categories is what we're talking about right now. God is that which is a metaphysical.
Oh, you do this every time. You do this every time, Robin. Every time I ask
What am I doing?
You are creating whole categories of things that just exist, right? This is just one thing in a category of things we can't be neutral about.
I don't know.
You can't be neutral. So I'll give you another example. You cannot be neutral towards the fact that you are that you're experiencing things or that you're alive. You can't be neutral towards that.
Neutral meaning accepting or not accepting?
No, neutral meaning that you neither affirm nor deny the proposition. That you're alive right now. That you're experiencing things. Or that you're look, bottom line is, okay, well, even if I'm just coming up, look,
Robin,
bottom line,
Robin,
okay, you could say that I'm coming up with this proprietary category.
Actually, no.
Like,
Robin.
It's either what I'm saying is true and I have a justification for it, or it's not true. What I want to know is if you agree with what I'm saying already, then I don't have to give my justification. But if you don't agree, then I'm glad to unpack why I'm holding to the position I hold to.
Robin,
which is why I'm asking you, do you agree with my statement?
You had a good point earlier. It took me a minute, not because I was angry, but because I was mulling over what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you for providing something else in that category. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, you're trying to wrap it back around, but I kind of want to give you kudos. Like, you did a thing, we asked for it, and now I'm taking a second to chew on it. So, can I be neutral about my own experience? Are there?
Okay, look, this is not really.
Well, no,
I feel like you're getting sidetracked, because it's not really. You could say I can't be neutral towards that. That's fine. What I'm here to argue, okay? Because you could say that other part is debatable. I'm here to. I have the case. I have a justification for specifically what I'm talking about right now, which is neutrality towards God. Okay. Okay. That's what I have. That's what I'm willing right now to justify to you. The other issue is just a side example, which is I wouldn't find it to be too controversial, but that's a side issue. Okay?
Right, but do you get why it's important to unpack that first in order to convince us of this other thing that you're trying to get across?
No, it's not. It's not necessary to provide you other examples if I'm willing right now to justify my claim to you that God is not something you can be neutral towards. I don't need to justify that you cannot be neutral towards you having experiences in order for me to justify that you cannot be neutral towards God.
So it's a useless comparison to make in the first place?
Well, you asked me to give other categories, and that's why I did. But that's not really necessary, because I'm willing to make the case right now for what I stand for, which is that you cannot be neutral towards God. Okay. I'm willing to do that, which is why I've been asking you now, at least 3 or 4 times, if you agree with my statement, so I can move forward.
Robin,
in justifying it.
Robin, the way you're putting that, it sounds like you think we're pettifogging you. Is that what you think?
What do you say?
Pettifogging. That we're getting. It was a word that was used in the last episode, and I can't stop using it. That we're being so focused on definitions that we're preventing the conversation from moving forward. That it might be an active ploy for us to not move forward.
No, I don't think you're. I think these are definitions that are important to understand, but I have laid them out already at this point, and so at this point, I just want to get to the justification for my position.
Go for it. Justify it. Why do you think it's impossible to be neutral towards your definition of God?
Because everyone has a metaphysical framework if they're operating intelligently in the world. That when I predicate. When I'm operating within the world, I'm just making decisions about things. I'm comparing things.
Hey, Robin, real quick, I think you may have gotten a call while you were saying that. Can you go back and say that again, please? You cut out.
Oh, yes. I said that everyone who's operating meaningfully and intelligibly in the world is going to require that they are operating within the context of a metaphysical framework, meaning that they're operating with a foundational sense as to what does it mean for things to be true or false, possible or impossible, what is the fundamental relationship between facts. If you don't have an answer to those kind of questions, you're not operating in the world meaningfully. You wouldn't be predicating meaningfully or making decisions about things or comparing things meaningfully without a metaphysical framework that you're operating under.
Can someone be wrong with that? Like the way you described it, determining whether or not something is true or false. My first thought is, like a personal Jiminy Cricket, somebody who says this is wrong, but in my worldview, the way that I understand things, people can be wrong about an inner sense of truth and false. Would you agree?
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Okay.
But I'm saying that it's going to immediately disqualify you from being meaningful, from being intelligible, metaphysical, like on the ultimate grand scheme of things, if you do not first have a metaphysical framework. Moving from there, once you have one, of course you have to have the right one.
No. Wait.
I mean, if you're going to be speaking truthfully,
I need a clarification here, real fast. So you said it's impossible to be neutral towards God. And now you're bringing in additional qualifiers like meaningfully operating in the world or operating ultimately in the universe. These phrases are adding in context that was not in your original statement. So is your statement that in order to...
No, right now I'm justifying my claim. That's what you asked me to do.
Right. And in order to move meaningfully through the world or operate meaningfully through the world, we must have some kind of stance on God because you're adding in additional requirements here. Do you see what you're doing? You're adding in things like meaningful. And that could sway the decision one way or another as to whether or not we agree with you.
the assumption, which I wouldn't think would need to be stated, is that you at least believe that you're operating meaningfully in the world. I didn't think I'd need to qualify that, but I'm talking to you specifically, and I'm talking to Eric with the assumption that at least you believe that you're operating within the world that is not in a way that is metaphysically arbitrary.
I don't know what any of these words mean.
Yeah, I the way that I work with those, so here's the thing. I think that I'm operating with the best understanding of the world that I can, and I'm constantly improving it. And I do think it is arbitrary, but I think that all of it is to some degree arbitrary. And so because of that, I don't see how that's a disqualifier.
Well, by arbitrary, let me just make sure that we have a clear definition of arbitrary, because I don't know if you'd want to make that statement. By arbitrary, I'm saying metaphysically arbitrary. I'm saying that there is no metaphysical frame of reference for things like truth or possibility or impossibility. So earlier I said that when you're dealing with a metaphysic, you're answering questions like, what does it mean for things to be true fundamentally, or possible or impossible, or like the fundamental relationship between them. If you're saying that you're operating arbitrarily, then you don't have like an answer to any of those questions, which would be suicidal philosophically.
Well, I like the test you provided, so let's go with it for just a second, because I want to know if you determine whether or not something is true, right? I operate on the correspondence theory of truth. I think that if something corresponds to reality, it is true. That is how I determine whether or not a thing is true. I test it, and that's what I go with. When you're saying that I need some ultimate thing to compare it against, that doesn't really jive with my understanding of truth. And so,
well, let me just be clear. Frame of reference. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out kind of how you're seeing this, how you're viewing this, so that I can operate in that framework.
Well, I'll just give an example. So, I don't know if you might not like this, but I'm just going to give an example. So if somebody were to ask me what my metaphysical framework is, I'm going to tell them the Christian God, and that all truth is that which derives from the Christian God. All that is possible and impossible, the limits between those things are going to be by the Christian God, and God is ultimately the ground for all things that exist. All truth, right? That is what God is the ground for. Anything that is not in conformance with what God has said or what God is would be considered not the truth. That is my position. That is a position that I stand by. And so that's one. It's called the creator-creation distinction. God is ultimate. He's created all things. And that is one of many metaphysical frameworks that one person can have. Okay?
Okay.
So another framework would be something like if somebody wanted to say, and it's really kind of a non-framework, somebody would say something like, everything is a brute fact. There is no ultimate framework or like frame of reference, that's going to ground any truth. It's just, everything's a brute fact. There is nothing that you could attribute to this fact as a cause for it. That's another example of a metaphysical framework. It's kind of a non-framework, a negation of a framework in that sense. Bottom line is that everyone has to have one if they're operating meaningfully in the world.
So what makes yours right? Because
What do you mean, what makes mine right?
I'm assuming that if you are convinced that your framework is the correct one, then you have good reason for that. What is that reason?
I believe that God has the properties that are required for knowledge and intelligibility and rationality. Again, this is my justification. Are you asking me now to justify God or to justify my original claim to you?
No, I'm asking you to justify God. I'm asking you why you think your framework is the correct one.
So, okay, I'll answer your question, but I want to make sure we have a resolution to what I called here for.
No.
Do you now agree with my earlier statement that you cannot be neutral?
Robin, that's not what conversations are. You're not having a conversation with us. It's very clear you have a script and you're scared to get off of it. This is a conversation. We are granting you the benefit of having a conversation on this show. So have a conversation with us. We have gone here. This is where we're going now. Prove God to me, Robin. Why is your framework correct?
Okay. Yeah, so the Christian God, I don't know if you're familiar with transcendental reasoning, but it's reasoning to what is necessary for certain things to be the case. So an example of a transcendental argument would be something like, if a cake exists, then flour exists. A cake, that would be premise one. Premise two would be a cake exists. A cake exists. The conclusion would be that flour exists. The soundness of the argument can be put into question, but it's a valid argument, okay? If a cake exists and flour exists, cake exists, therefore flour exists. That's a transcendental argument.
Right.
So that's what I use to justify if to somebody else the existence of God.
Okay,
God has properties that are required for intelligibility.
Okay, cool. That's a valid argument.
So God has a set
Prove to me that it is sound. I will grant you here, right now, that is a valid argument. It works out mathematically. Prove to me that it's sound. Because if it's not, or if you can't prove it, it's useless.
Yeah. He's asking you to evaluate the premises. Yeah.
So God has certain properties, and I can walk through the properties with you and show by reductio ad absurdum why, if God were to be deficient in any of his properties, that there would not be intelligibility. So for one, God is ultimate, okay, meaning that he is the foundation for all things. All things derive and depend upon God.
Flour.
We talked about this a little bit earlier.
All things are dependent upon flour.
No, the cake analogy was just a.
I know, I'm swapping out another word for it because I can make that claim just as easily as you can. Reductio ad absurdum necessitates that flour is the reason for everything. We are a giant cake, Robin, and if you don't believe that we are cake and you reject the reality of the ultimate flour, then you are unintelligible to me, and I don't know why we're having a conversation. Do you see where
I think you're trivializing and making a joke out of a serious argument, and I'm trying to present it to you, and that's I mean, I can just tell that's what you're trying to do. No, I'm trying to present it to you.
My point is that you can swap any word out for God and make these claims. My concern is that you have not proven the God part. I can't.
I'm doing it right now. And as I was doing it, you started talking about flour.
It's a circular argument. I've heard this argument before. You have given it to me before. You are defining God by God's properties, and you cannot do that.
Isn't everything defined by its properties?
God is just the same. Is God hinging on the same logical requirements of everything else? Or does God play by special rules?
I don't even know what that question means.
Does God play by special rules, or are we holding God to the same logical frameworks as everything else?
Yeah, I just presented. I'm telling you right now, this is a transcendental reasoning, so it would be a logical argument. You just told me transcendental reasoning is is valid. So I'm now trying to show you the soundness of the argument.
Right, exactly.
So yes, I'm presenting with you a logical, deductive argument right now.
So if I might. With flour, we could say, okay, well, let's investigate the flour. We can get flour and we can determine its properties based on direct observation.
Right.
Without that,
I thought you wanted to hear my argument.
I'm trying to back you up for a second.
Well, I mean, I'd like to present my argument. If you think it's flawed, you're more than welcome to do that. But I don't think you've heard my argument. I haven't actually presented you my argument.
Yeah, I
don't remember doing that.
Well, then that might need to be another call where it sounds like we have so much linguistic differences to work through.
Look, dude.
That's
well. My original point was not to justify God to you, because I know this is a much longer conversation. It's actually much simpler to just explain to you why you cannot be neutral towards God. Which is, I mean, I didn't come here to justify God's existence to you.
Right.
Like, that wasn't even my original intent.
Why would we have any opinion on something you cannot justify and aren't interested in defining for us?
I did define it in the beginning. I did define God.
Okay. So
and then actually the reason why we're talking right now is because you accepted that I defined God. So I did define him. That's why we're not even talking about definitions anymore. Because if you didn't accept the definition, we'd still be talking about it.
Well, we tried to be charitable, and we went, okay, Robin has an understanding of it and is operating on these assumptions, and we're trying to use Robin's definition.
Yeah, so I did define it for you. This is not an unclear definition. It's not controversial. In fact, if you ask any Western theist out here, I'm willing to bet you that the majority of them, whatever they believe, God, as I've defined it, would be consistent with their conception of God. Even if they're an agnostic or an atheist, they have this conception of God in their mind. I'm willing to wager that this is a conception of God that is not uncommon or controversial. That God is simply a mind, right? That's conscious, an agent or personal, that is ultimate. He created all things. This is not a complicated definition. I might be using terms, but I define them,
Robin,
in a way that is easy to understand.
Robin, saying it's not complicated doesn't mean it's not complicated. That is actually one of the
if billions of people have this conception of God,
Robin,
I wouldn't call it complicated.
That's
Robin?
an argument ad populum, just so you know.
So let's
complicated is a statement in this regard. I'm taking complicated to mean a statement about the ability for somebody to wrap their head around something. If a billion people affirm a concept, of billions of people affirm a concept, then they should not have a hard time wrapping their head around if they affirm it.
Okay.
Right. So
Billions
this is
of
not a
people
complicated
believe in
concept.
gravity, but ask the average Joe Schmo on the street to define what gravity is and why it works, and you're not going to get a good answer.
Well, let's go to your God thing. You think billions of people accept that God is an ultimate foundation to reality and the underpinning under which
a metaphysical framework exists,
and that metaphysical framework is the only true framework by which any of us are actually using reasoning. Is that
no, what I said was that God, people have a conception of God, irrespective of whether or not they believe in God, that would be consistent. Many people have a conception of God, billions, I said, that would be consistent with what I've just laid out here. That God is ultimate; He created all things, and that it's a mind. Okay. Now that's a very bare bones definition. But if you ask a Bible believing Christian, this is what a lot of them would say. Ask a Muslim, this is what a lot of them would say. Ask a Jew, and they take up the majority of the population of the earth. Okay, got it.
Okay, then I can respond.
Look, we're getting into the weeds here. All I'm doing is just I've defined a term. Okay, whether or not you think it's most or many or 1 billion or 2 million,
dude.
Look, that's an entirely different issue. Okay.
Let me answer. You just gave a really, really great piece that I needed in order to move forward. Robin, I actually personally am not neutral about that. I don't think that a mind could exist without a body. And because of that, I reject that outright. I'm not neutral. I reject it. Can somebody be neutral about it? It entirely depends on whether or not they think, it entirely depends on their concept of mind-body dualism. But I can speak for myself and say I am not neutral to that. A mind cannot exist without a body. And so because of that, not only do I reject your premise, I think that it is not possible for it to be true. So it doesn't even get to go to the grown-up table to sit down.
Okay. Do you have a justification for that?
Sure. Well, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. We have not yet gotten any kind of I think we need to justify that a mind can exist without a body before we can use that as a premise. And
that's the argumentum ad ignorantum fallacy.
It's the what now?
Are you talking about an argument?
It's the argumentum ad ignorantum, to say that something is false if it has not been proven to be true to you.
Right. So I get what you're saying, but you're making a positive claim. And I think that.
So are you.
Okay, so if you're going to say like black swan fallacy, right? Eric, you haven't seen a black swan. That doesn't mean that none exist, right? I think that it would be consistent for somebody who has never seen a black swan to rationally say no black swans exist, or at least not to my understanding of it, until such time as they are presented with evidence to the contrary. So.
It's the null hypothesis.
Well, hold on a minute. It's not a null hypothesis because Eric just said that he is not neutral. He said that he believes positively that something is the case. Right. If I have to present a logical argument for what I believe, then so do you.
Okay, perfect. So can I similarly say that unicorns exist? Just because you haven't seen one or heard of one doesn't mean that they don't exist, and to say that they don't exist is.
Well, that's a category error because we're talking about something you can be neutral towards. Right now, even if you couldn't be neutral towards unicorns, you told me that you positively believe that they don't exist.
Right. So I'm exploring this with you. So yes, I in as much as I've investigated it, minds are a product of a body. Plus other things, right? Certain conditions need to be made. I don't think a mind exists when you're dead, and so now
well, that's different from what you said earlier because now you're telling me, as far as I know, or I haven't seen something, which is different from me saying that something is not true.
That is correct. is there a way that we can test whether or not minds can exist without bodies? Because
that's not really relevant.
Actually, it is.
No, because that would be relevant to what you're saying now, but not to what you said earlier.
So
because we could say, for example, that we cannot test something outside of the observable universe. We cannot test that. That doesn't mean that there's nothing there.
Well,
but you're making a positive claim.
Even if I told you that you cannot test it.
Sure. So there are also unicorns, leprechauns, fairies, and anything else I could possibly imagine. There are, a million pink elephants outside of existence.
There's Jesus Aquaman.
Yeah, like all of those things are there. You can't prove it doesn't exist, and just because you can't accept.
But you're saying it doesn't exist. But so you're saying so hold on. You're saying you're making a statement of something you cannot prove.
No, you're right. I think I'm flexing on that, and you're right. I need to be a little bit more humble and say that, in my experience, I have not gotten any indication that a mind can exist without a body, and so I can't, make a deductive argument. I can only go inductive on that, and I think that that's kind of the limitation of what humans can do.
So wait, Robin, did you just prove that we can be neutral towards your claim? Because you seem to be arguing against the fact that we can't be.
No, all I'm doing is saying that Eric is probably more on. No, I'm not making the claim that you can be neutral. I'm making the claim that you cannot be neutral. Eric said that he is not neutral, but now upon examination, it seems like he's more on the neutral side. At least when it comes to making the statement one way or the other, it seems like that's not something he would probably do.
So I don't know about that. I think that there are some things that can't be deductively done, right? The problem of induction, moving from, experience to what is, right? It's a leap that both parties need to agree to make before they can move forward. And if you're not agreeing that we can make deductive arguments, then that's fine. We can stay in the land of inductive, but let's just be super clear. You're also using inductive reasoning, by those standards.
No,
you're not
using
not true. Inductive reasoning.
Yes, I am. So what I told you, actually you guys agreed that transcendental reasoning is valid. And so if I'm going to give you a transcendental reasoning, then that would be like a deductive argument.
Well,
now you could argue the soundness of the argument, but if I gave you something in the form, it would be valid.
Right. I think what V was saying was that modus ponens is a valid structure in logic, and using modus ponens, it can get you to, true conclusions.
A correct, mathematically proven structure, sure.
Given true premises. Not necessarily that the transcendental argument is sound, but that modus ponens is.
Right.
Yeah, so my argument, just to put it in I'm not going to go in depth here. My argument for God, I can, but I don't know if you have the time. But my argument for God is simply this: there needs to be a being, that is ultimate, that's a mind, that's revelatory, it's always truth revealing, is relational, that is all of these things, it's eternal.
Why?
And that is consistent entirely and exclusively with the Christian God. That is my argument. Now I can go into depth of that if you want me to, but that is my position.
How did you determine that this
a valid
must
argument?
Be?
So actually, here's the thing, Robin. I feel like we had a good kind of row here, but it's 12:30. We only have a half hour left, and you're our second call. Robin, you live in DC. Can you just move to Austin and we can just sit and
Please don't.
Argue with each other for days and days on end?
Maybe that might be in the works. I don't know.
In the meantime, Robin, we're going to keep challenging your presuppositions, and you know that every time you call in, you know that.
No, that's great.
There are a couple of times though that when you called in, we twice, or at least 2 times during this conversation, I stopped, I reflected, and I revised. Jumping in and saying, well, we need to move the conversation, didn't give me the opportunity to stop, reflect, and revise. And I want to make sure that we give people good examples of what that looks like.
Okay. Well, thanks again for taking my call. This was definitely enlightening.
I'm glad you think it was. Take care.
Do you see? I knew this was where it was going. the entire time. And then I got there.
I know, but here's the thing. We need to have it out for the people to see it.
No,
because if you're preempting it, then no one's going to see it had out.
Here's the deal. Robin calls in with something that has nothing to do with his God claim. He gets us to make a positive statement about a God claim. And then he says, well, you just made a positive claim. Defend it. And we said, well, you also make a positive claim. Well, we're not talking about that. You defend your claim. When I tried to get him to describe what God was and how we know that God is real, he was like, well, that's not what I called in about. We're getting off topic. No, that's the entire ballgame, because you are not willing or able to do that. And frankly, it's very disappointing to me to see that we're back at square one. Like, we've had 4 or 5 calls with this dude, and every single time he treats it like this is the first time he talks with us about something.
I've done this for 5 years. It's going to keep being step 1, and I don't mind it.
Well,
I know.
I do.
Well,
we'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, we have like 10 callers. For our call screeners, I think we may need to start cutting down callers because we just don't have enough time for all of them. In the meantime, let's take Joe in Kansas. Joe is saying that hard determinism is almost as absurd as some religious beliefs, in your opinion. Joe, is that about right?
Yes. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
So hard determinism is almost as absurd as some religious beliefs. So really quick, it says that you're a theist. Just the phrasing of that sounds like a really sarcastic atheist. And so I just want to be super clear who you are.
It's I've called in before.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm the deist who believes that God created the universe, but it stopped there. It's, the 4 fundamental forces aren't attached to God in any way. It's just it's how I rationalize how physics kind of breaks down once we get back to the very earliest nanoseconds of the universe.
Okay.
So, but I was just, last time I called in, we sort of talked about free will, and one thing that just came to mind in the last couple days is that if hard determinism is true, and all choices ever made are predetermined, then, like, the way I thought about it, just as I was in the queue, was I had a bowl of Captain Crunch for breakfast this morning. Mm-hmm. And I didn't choose that was determined. So that was not my choice. It was predetermined by the universe. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that happened, that I made that non-choice, is because the universe, 40 years ago or whenever, had someone in the company come up with, I just made this new cereal. What are we going to call it? Oh, it'll be called Captain Crunch. It'll go out onto the shelves and it'll be wildly popular. The only reason that happened,
it's kind of like one line of dominoes, right?
Is because the universe, decided that guy was going to go into the cereal making business, and reductio ad absurdum to all the way back to that only happened because his parents met each other, right. And which can then be applied to every single person who's ever lived.
Right.
So that has happened that has affected quite literally trillions of choices in the history of life.
Well, now we got to put the word choices in quotes, but
right, yeah.
Okay. So what?
Isn't that just as, like, I feel like that gets into maybe not the completely ignoring verifiable science kind of things, not like, flat earthers or that kind of stuff, but I feel like that's not too much different from saying, well, it was created by a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind.
Well, I don't think that we need any extra things for this. It's just kind of, we see dominoes tipping and we go, okay, well, this domino was created by that domino, which was, tipped by that domino. And you gave your example entirely, going that way, right? You can find a chain of causation going all the way out.
Sure.
And so I think that that kind of determinism is just what we call that line of causation. And so I don't know why it would be on kind of equal footing as needing a creator that needs to be kind of, described and proven and have different traits and a mind without a body, or maybe it does have a body, but it's outside of the universe. Like, all of those different things are so much more than just kind of going, oh, hey, look, dominoes, like I don't see why that's absurd. It's scary. Don't get me wrong. It is scary as hell. And it makes you wonder, right? What about consequences? Do people deserve consequences? And then, to some degrees, it's like, okay, well, if somebody was given no opportunities in life, if the only chances they had to survive were by doing terrible things, and then we judge them by those terrible things, the fact is, we still have a system in place. Is it fair? No, it's not. But we kind of don't live in a fair world. It bites. But I don't want to turn to the upsetting consequences to justify rejecting it. You get what I mean? Like, if somebody were to say, and I'm going to use a very, very absurd example. If somebody said, well, the Holocaust couldn't have happened because if it did, that would have been real bad. So no, that didn't happen. It's an appeal to consequence, and it doesn't actually do much other than say, well, I don't want to accept it because it's scary. And I'm only telling you that this way because, holy crap, Joe, it scared me. But I don't think it's absurd. Well, I think it's just scary.
I guess. And here's the thing. I'm regarding determinism and free will, I'm perfectly comfortable saying I have no fucking idea what is about whether whether or not free will really is just something that, whether or not free will is an illusion, whether or not hard determinism is true. I'm perfectly comfortable saying I don't know. Yeah. And so I don't know if it's definitely frightening on like a base level.
Yeah.
But I don't know if specifically I don't know if I'm specifically scared of it and that's why I'm a deist. But it's just thinking about it is if determinism is true, then what we just talked about is also true necessarily. And so like, how is that slightly more ridiculous or slightly less ridiculous than certain God claims?
Just because one is an observation, the other is an assumption.
Well, I think that the ridiculousness, the absurdism piece here, the reason it feels weird is because both of them are not backed up by common sense, which is why common sense is not a good metric for determining what is true. But when we look at the world and how the world works, we assume certain things. And we have, just our base understanding of how the world works based on where we are in it. And then we also have society feeding into those assumptions. So, for example, for somebody who is an atheist and maybe has always been an atheist, the idea of hard determinism and the idea of a God that created everything would be equally as absurd, just because neither of those things feel like they're backed up by common sense, and neither of those things were things that were in their immediate vicinity in terms of what their community was talking about. So it's unfamiliar.
So that's like societal effect.
Right. And so I think the reason you're feeling this tension here, the reason both of those things feel the same way, is not because they hold any necessarily similar components, but because you're accurately pinpointing neither of these things line up with what I've experienced or what I've seen in society. And so they both feel foreign, they feel odd. And I think that might be where that absurdism kind of comes into play. The next step is to move past that absurdism and say, all right, if this were true, what would that mean, and go into what the results of one or the other or both being true would imply in reality, and see if that gets borne out.
Sure.
With hard determinism, it's still really difficult to determine if that is borne out in reality. But what we can say,
it seems almost impossible.
Right, and it is at this point, because we have not advanced scientifically enough to determine that. But what we can say when looking at these two unfalsifiable claims is that one of them requires additional unfalsifiable claims on top of it about other things that have been disproven. And one of them doesn't necessarily require those. And so one becomes a little more weighty, becomes a little bit more probable, not to the extent that you should drop everything and believe it 100%, right? We wouldn't advocate for that.
Right.
But
Occam's razor is a tool.
I guess
Right.
that gets to Occam's razor.
yeah.
Joe, you know what I absolutely love about your calls? So I'm not trying to sound demeaning here, but what you're explaining is, and what you're going through is right on point with something that I went through, and a lot of people who are watching have went through, and possibly what a lot of people who are still watching or will watch this are going through, and it's this idea of unpacking. You know, there are so many things that I tied in with religious belief that I couldn't accept that a God didn't exist, even if I had, specific reasons, because I had so much tied up in my understanding of the world that I needed to reevaluate and reassess. And your conclusion, Joe, may not be the same conclusion that we landed on. But
Sure.
the process of unpacking, I think, is something that can feel very lonely for a lot of people. And I'm really glad that you're calling in, because I want people to see that, because it's uncomfortable. And I'm really glad that you're putting in the work. And I hope that people watching this can be inspired to put in the work, because it's a really, really beneficial thing. So thank you, Joe. Thank you for calling.
Yep. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, V.
Absolutely.
Take care, man.
Joe is fun to talk to.
He is, because he's so open and just like, wow, I hadn't thought, and I really do kind of want to aspire to doing that too. Maybe in the comments, people are going to see what happened with, Robin. They're going to be like, Eric, you gave Robin way too much. But I want to exemplify the behavior that I want to see from my interlocutor. And in order to do that, if the conversation needs to be 10 times longer, at least I'll have done it the way that I feel is the right way.
Well, I think we're going to be a pretty even split between Eric was too easy on him and V was too hard on him. And I fully admit, I just dislike the guy, because it's really difficult to look at somebody and interact with someone honestly while you have seen what happens behind the scenes and understand the motivation behind the call in. So if that's no longer the case, Robin, and you really want to have those conversations, please be explicit and say, Darth did not send me to talk to you, and we are not all gathered in a Discord somewhere mocking you behind the scenes. Be explicit about that, because that's useful information for me to know, so I don't make that judgment moving forward.
I disagree. I think that.
Oh, don't get me wrong. You can mock us as much as you want. That's fun.
There was an entire, I've seen entire Facebook groups put together for people who wanted to prove me wrong and Jamie wrong. That there are people who exist just to do that. So I don't know. Anyway, who should we talk to next? I picked the last two.
Sure. Xeno in South Korea thinks our epistemology is flawed.
Probably. Let's find out. Xeno, you're live with Eric and V.
Hey, Eric.
Hey! Geez, South Korea.
Hey.
We have people calling from England, from Mexico, and we're not even able to take everybody. I'm heartbroken. Xeno, thank you for calling in.
I know. Thank you so much. I just want to ask you two a question before I start.
Mm-hmm.
Are you learning anything from these calls, Eric?
Tons.
And V?
Oh, yeah.
Tons. So if you were to go back into my very first episodes back when I was on Talk Heathen, I was an aggressive little shit. I mean, I was annoying, and people would put in the comments, they go, oh God, Eric is such an annoying little prick. And I'd be like, I know. I think that,
No, that's really great to hear. It really is.
Well, taking the time, watching our episodes back, V and I really do break down and go, hey, where did we go wrong? What could we do better? What do we want to see in these conversations? And because of that, I'm still far from where I want to be, but I'm definitely a lot further than where I started.
Also, things like
That's true.
chaos calling in and talking about meta time and realizing that's a crux that we have not explored yet. So
No.
we're going to go and do some more research on that.
Yeah.
Wait, did you say meta time?
Yeah.
Meta time, apparently.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I just learned something new today, so I got to go back and
Maybe.
do some more grinding.
As
Who
a
knows?
concept,
Who
yeah.
knows?
Who the hell knows? Anyway, but
Okay, so anyhow, let's get
you
to
wanted to talk
Yeah.
about our epistemology. So
Yeah.
hit us.
So, okay, so I simply believe that I want to lay this out in layman terms that I believe my epistemology is to understand cause and effect, and everything starts with a cause and effect. Maybe in a different universe it does not, but in our universe, yes, it does. I simply define. I think it's important to define God first. So I simply define God as the first cause.
Okay.
To whatever's going on in our life. That's what I define God as. So for example, the creators of Halo, they're the god of Halo. The creators of Tetris is the god of Tetris. That's how I define God.
Sure.
I'm not religious. I'm a deist.
Sure.
So my question to you is that if I choose to define God this way,
Mhm.
don't you have to go with my definition and say, well, that's what you choose to define God as? Well, happy, that's a good life. That's fine. How can you disagree with what I say God is?
So therein is the rub, because there's a difference between being heard and making sure that the terminology you're using is useful. So like if you're going to say that, the cause of the universe is God, and that's all to the definition, and if I accept that the universe had a beginning, then I'd be like,
Then God exists?
well, that definition, sure. And you know what? Lots of people have given me definitions of God that I've entirely agreed with, because they're entirely, just forward. Somebody says, well, God's just like the universe, man. Cool. Well, then that God exists.
Yeah.
Dude, you've talked to people who've thought that. Don't even. I mean, geez, I think there was a time when I thought that. But the reason I changed and flexed on it is because I wanted to have more in-depth conversations, and I realized that using that definition prevented those conversations from happening.
I see. And I was that way. I'm not going to lie. I was an atheist. I hate saying that, but I really was an atheist. But what got me to change from my atheist position was this whole thought of, and I hate the thought that, well, if I come from something that has to be the first domino, it's not this guy with a beard, but there's so much in the world that we don't understand. There's so many question marks, and I have to come from something. I'm not saying it's this big old guy in the sky that's making everything, but I have to understand that I must come from something. And what is that?
Well,
what is that singularity? What is that thing that I come from? You know what I mean? Or
It's called a
follow?
womb.
Well, yeah.
No. I mean, so where does the womb come from? You could go back. You could what's the term I'm looking for here? When you break things down, so my mind is not straight
No,
today.
yeah. Reductio ad absurdum. It's a
Yeah. Thank you so much. I hate that term.
It's
But
a
so
common-
when you
it's a common
when
thing.
you reduct it to absurdity, we know that the womb didn't just exist. Something had to exist before the womb. And I woke up today thinking, you know what? I'm not even responsible for my fingers. I usually don't wake up thinking this, but I was thinking like, I'm not even responsible for my fingernails. So there's something that created that. And I think the cells are the real geniuses here, and that there has to be something behind those cells. So I start going back all the way to, okay, well, where did this start?
So it sounds like there are two different conversations being had: what is, and why is. Mm-hmm. And the question of why, it sounds like what you're hung up on, and
it's a good question. Like that is the thing, and because Xeno, you seem like somebody who is an honest interlocutor, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? There are people, and I do this when I think it's going to be, twisted later on, who do say, oh, well, you came from your parents, and your parents came from their parents, and, why are we even having this conversation? But there is a larger philosophical just bigness in really trying to grapple with why is there something.
Yeah. And
that's huge. And how the individual person who I might be talking to conceives of that bigness, what words they use, really isn't any of my concern at all. I don't need to have you prove why you use the word God to define the answer to that question in your own mind. The only time that I would have any kind of concern is if you then said, you also have to have this answer to the question. That's the only conflict there for me.
Yeah, can I offer an alternative?
Sure.
Okay, so if we're getting to the why question, right? Well, why does this happen? It kind of infers that there's value being put on a thing that's outside of yourself. And I feel like that makes us NPCs if you play video games.
Oh my God.
Right? Like,
look, I program. I know it's way too much about that, but go on.
Yeah. If we are just being slotted into another plan that's not your own, if you are just subject to, a value that's given to you, I feel like that takes a lot of the color out of the world. And I think these kind of conversations often get to a point where somebody, at least for me, I got really depressed. I was like, well, shit, if I don't have some grand, some part of the grand scheme, if I'm not, somehow necessary in the, moving forward of humanity, then what's the point? But
well, can I stop you there for a second? It's not why. Well, I do wonder why, but there's also understanding that it is simply that is. Like, even if I don't understand why, like I don't understand why something happens, that doesn't negate the fact that it's there. So I guess and I'll call you next week and maybe we can like unpack this a little bit more, because I know you got to get to other callers. But what I want to say is I understand that is, it just simply is. Yeah. Forget the why. But do you agree with the fact that there may be like a single point where we come from? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, maybe.
Like something had to build off of something else, right, to get here. I'm not saying time, space, and matter comes from a quote unquote God, but don't you think that everything, if we can rewind it back to a certain point, everything comes from something, and there had to probably have been a single point?
It seems to intuitively make sense. The best that I can do is kind of defer to people who dedicate their lives to understanding it better. Because the best I can give you is, I don't know. If it were the case, then okay. If it weren't the case, then, either way, I want to learn more. And what I really hope, though, is that people who are told that, I like your definition, right? What you started with, right? You define God as that which, the beginning of the universe. I worry that might cause a little less interest in people wanting to observe it, instead of going, well, I want to know more about what it is. That kind of Sagan approach of wonder about the unknown. And so I
guess I'm taking a more pragmatic approach, like in trying to leave emotions out. And I do get emotional, don't get me wrong, but the pragmatic approach is just to understand the facts and that things come from something, right? And my belief, I'm a deist. I don't believe any religions, by the way, but I believe that God
we figured
even has something that it comes from, and I have no idea what that would be. But God isn't the end all be all to me. God is simply like, to me, we're just talking. This is the subject at hand, and there are more complex topics out there other than God. But because we're talking about God, I would say that it's just wherever we come from. It's why we have gravity. It's why we have time, space, and matter. But with that, Eric, I'll let you move on to other callers, because I know you don't have that much time left.
I would love
unless
to
you want to add
this
something.
Conversation again. So
okay,
if you want to call back in, I have additional questions that mostly just relate to the pragmatics of using that word and how we how we bring that into conversation and why. But that would spin us off in a whole other direction.
Oh,
so
V is totally the pragmatist.
Yes.
So like that is a conversation that I want to see had. So I hope you do get back in.
Well, look, I've been banned from everywhere, and I swear it's not my fault. So I really appreciate the time you guys are taking to talk to me, because I have to release it somewhere, and I'm just glad I can talk to you two about it.
Well, so far it's been a very pleasant interaction, and if you call back next week, we'll take your call.
Yeah.
All right, it'll be about the exact same thing, and maybe I can go a little bit further and pick your brain, Eric and V. So you guys take care, okay?
Too.
Bye.
Take care, Xeno. Why would they get banned, I wonder?
I don't know. He seems like a nice person.
Yeah.
But, you know.
You never know.
We don't know.
Yeah.
At least he didn't, like, play a bunch of porn at the end of it, like the other guy.
Yeah, that's true. So we had another caller that, ooh, gosh, it was a really good one to end on. I think they dropped. But
We are at 1, so we should jump into
let's do live chats.
all of the live chats.
Super chats.
Super chats.
Okay.
Not all of the live chat. We would be here another 3 hours.
And there will be so many fish puns, I couldn't handle it.
You guys are incredible.
I couldn't stop watching.
Seriously, if you are listening to the podcast version of this episode, do yourself a favor and just go watch the live stream for the chat. Like, don't even worry about what we're saying. The chat is amazing.
The fish puns are incredible, and they just keep going. I wonder how many fish we caught, by the way. We'll see. So Jesse Chappelle sent $6.66 and says, thanks for getting me up early. I have so much homework due. Have a great show. Thank you, Jesse.
Petrobit sent a little rose emoji and 99 cents. Thank you.
Yay. Dante Verona sent $20 and says, George Carlin said, give me a fish and he will eat for a day. Teach him how to fish and he'll sit in a boat and drink beer all day. In my experience, that is absolutely true. When are we going fishing?
As soon as it gets warmer.
I like it.
Amit sent $10, thank you, Amit, and says, I don't give a fish what Jesus wants. Oops, sorry, wrong F word.
Blazing Wizard Pope sent 50 kroner, says, I have no fish to embarrass you further. I'll let myself trout. Oh, God damn it. I was not.
Top Cat sent us $5. Thank you, Top Cat.
Blazing Wizard Pope sent another 50 kroner, says, hey, please don't give my unicorn an existential crisis. I need to get home on it.
Simply Haven sent $50. Thank you, Haven, and said, I learn something new every week. This week I learned that precepts make me crazy.
It's one of the big reasons I wanted to get into, like...
You and me both.
I spent so much time in it, though. I don't know. I'm a glutton for punishment. 60-second Skeptic sent 20 Canadian and said, God damn it, fishing for attention by mocking a fantastic waterproof tweet just for the halibut, baiting us by floundering red herrings and whale tails. I don't see the point. Scale it back and stop casting such a wide net.
Damn.
There's so much pun in there.
There's so much pun. It hurts. Jesse Chappelle, another $6.66. Thank you, Jesse. Says, thanks for letting me unpack in this community. I hope I'm not getting my baggage all over the place. Thank you for this show. Jesse, that's what this show is for.
Yeah. And I just so you know, this support is going towards continuing this kind of thing where I don't think we mentioned it this episode, so I'm going to mention it before we forget. We're going to be putting super chats and specifically the verses that we're going to do on the 23rd towards getting a production computer and getting a producer.
Yeah.
So all of those donations are going to be going towards that, and we sincerely appreciate it. That is our goal. Okay, Moldred. Hey, Moldred sent $5 and says, don't believe everything you think.
John Klein sent $5 and says, this was a pun episode. Kelpians, in fact, did cause the burn today.
Oh, nice.
That's a Star Trek and a fish pun, and that is beautiful.
Absolutely. Trude, hey, it's been a long time. Sent 50, I think it's Norwegian. Said, good news, just got a job. Don't need to borrow $400 from Eric anymore.
Well, congratulations on the job.
Yeah.
Sarah Dye sent $10 and says, I will now go get some fish and chips. Yes.
King Nick, 1994, said, too tipsy for a pun. So sturgeon, cool fish. Cool.
Oh my gosh.
V, this has been a lot of fun.
This was a very fun episode. And if you enjoyed the rant at the beginning, let us know. If you're like, don't ever do that again, that was off-putting and horrible, also let us know that. And yeah, we hope to talk to you again next week.
But until then, we're glad we had this talk.